A lot of the rhetoric that I just heard from my friend Philip, which is rhetoric that is quite familiar to me from my race in 2012. I ran a race talking about the importance of workers, the importance of connecting with people. And look, I'm not because I'm a great intellectual that I came up with this, but it was just a recognition after having spent 20 years in politics and spent a lot of time, unlike unfortunately most politicians, actually going out, meeting and talking to people, that the country had changed dramatically, and that the Republican Party had changed, and the people who are willing to support conservatives have changed, and that if we were going to be successful electorally, we needed to connect to the people that were actually open to voting for us on issues, as was just said, that are really the issues that divide the country, and that's the culture. Those are the issues. We're seeing it now. I mean, I brought this book up. This is It Takes a Family. I wrote this book 20 years ago with ISI, and I wrote it in response to Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village. And people used to say, well, that's, takes a village. That's this African phrase, that was popularized. It takes a village to raise a child. But I understood what they really meant. Now you understand what they really mean. You understand now what they meant by it takes a village, which is you conservatives have the children and we'll take them and we'll indoctrinate them into what we believe. That's the village. And I wrote about that 20 years ago. I wrote about that what it really takes is a family, and we as conservatives have to fight for the family. Because if the family doesn't have control over our children, then we are lost. And if we don't build and rebuild the family, rebuild marriage, everything you say is true, except one missing piece. If you're married, none of those problems exist. You say, poor people who are poor, the workers don't have a chance. Not true if they're married. If they're married, they actually do fine. There actually is upward mobility. Why? Because, divide and conquer, right? Any of you have any kids? It's a lot easier with two parents than it is with one. It's like in life. The idea that, and this is what I tried to stress in this early work, which is conservative policy should be social policy to protect our children from the onslaught of the left. I talk in this book about the bigs and the littles, that everything in this country is controlled, every institution in this country. 20 years ago, I said every institution in this country is controlled by the left. They weren't as demonstrative as how they imposed their will on us, but they all controlled. I said the only thing left is the family and the church, and they are going to destroy both in the coming years. And they did. This is when I was advocating for a Defense of Marriage Act, and I was advocating for a constitutional amendment to define marriage. All of these things that people said, oh, you'll never have to worry about any of that. This is just alarmism on the part of the right. The reality is that all along, it was about destroying the last vestiges of self-sufficiency and subsidiarity, the opportunity to actually solve problems where they're most solvable, which is within the family. It's to destroy that to create reliance on the state, the bigs. And so if we don't recognize prima facie that the family is where we have to start, that all of these other things are important, economy is important, all these other, if we don't restore marriage and the proper understanding of marriage and its incredible role in providing our workers for the future and having children and supporting that family. I love reading the Wall Street Journal. It's one of the few papers I read, but it drives me crazy that anytime we do anything in the federal government to support the family, it is an apostasy. It's not conservative. Well, we can go out and support all these other businesses by preferential tax rates and deregulation. But if we support the most essential business in America. What's the most essential business in America? The family. Every family is a small business. But we don't look at it that way. Every family is an economic unit. Why don't we just consider that, if we take our libertarian friends, just consider the family an economic unit, and maybe they'll treat us better. Maybe they'll actually do things to encourage family formation, support of children to be raised. So to me, that's the foundational part at which I wrote about. Fast forward to 2012, and I recognized that this group of people that we used to rely on to support the Republican Party, which were suburban voters, was gone. And they were gone not because they were not doing economically well. They're doing very well economically. But like all people who do well economically, as the Bible says, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. They have become not people of the Bible, but people of the God of self. And people of the God of self focus on what pleases me and not what's right or wrong. What's happened in suburban America is that they have gone woke. They have bought into the culture of materialism and self. And they aren't going to vote for us because they don't want to be told that what they want to do to make themselves happy, even though it's immoral and wrong, is they don't want to be told by a group of politicians that they're wrong. They don't want to be shamed. And so we started to lose them. But the people who suffer the consequences of a woke culture, of a culture that doesn't elevate marriage, that promotes in many ways single life, single parenthood, those people realize the devastation that it's bringing them. And they want a healthier culture. Poor people want to get married. They just can't. There just isn't anybody to marry. And yet they desperately understand how important that is. And we need to provide a vision and a voice for that. So that's what I did when I ran for president in 2012. I talked about I forget what it's called now, but which is, the three things you have to do and you'll never be in poverty. I talked about this. The one thing Mitt Romney picked up from my campaign was this idea, which is that if you graduate from high school, you have a full-time job, and you don't have children before you get married, the chance of you ever being in poverty is less than 2%. That seems so common sense. And everything we talked about in 2012 was common sense about bringing manufacturing back here, controlling immigration. Why? Because immigration, in my opinion, bringing illegal immigrants into this country just creates more disadvantage for low-income workers in America. That resonated with people. And so I wrote this book after the race called Blue Collar Conservatism, Final Story. So I was on a radio station in New York promoting my book, Blue Collar Conservatism, and talking about how we had to run and focus on working men and women if we were ever going to have a chance of winning Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, et cetera. And I got a call from a friend of mine and said, "What did you say about Donald Trump on the radio this morning?" I said, "I didn't say anything about Donald Trump on the radio." He said, "Yeah, you did, because he called me and said he wants to talk to you." And I said, "Okay, give him my number. I'm happy to talk to him." He didn't talk to me. He sent me a text. It was a transcript of the radio program, of which I did not mention his name, didn't even reference him, but I talked about Joe Piscopo was beating up on Atlantic City and closing casinos, which he did. And I just said, well, you can't blame the people who closed the casinos, and went on and described why. And he circled that, said, "Thank you," because of course everything is about Donald Trump. He said, "Thank you." It said, "Come see me in New York." So I went two months later, month and a half later, to New York, walk into his office. He's sitting behind his desk, and he's holding a copy of not this book, but my book, Blue Collar Conservatism. And I walked in, and before I said a word, he said, "I read your book." And I said, "Yeah, you didn't read my book." "No, I read your book. Great book." And I said, "Yeah, the hell you read my book." "No, I read this book." And then he went on and told me about what was in the book. And then he made the claim that someone needs to run for president on this book. And he did. And he did a much better job than I did. And this is the future of the Republican Party. It's the future of the conservative movement. We are a blue-collar party. We are a party of people who aspire to marry, aspire to have good and stable lives. And we don't talk to them about it. In fact, we actually vote for gay marriage. We don't even vote for marriage anymore because we're afraid of the popular culture and the bigs who we're afraid will crush us if we stand up against them.